So I was browsing the internet a day or two ago, and I saw some videos popping up about talking about the new Batman vs Superman movie. I thought to myself, wow, it's already out? Sheesh, time sure does fly. And I went to Rotten Tomatoes to see how the movie was faring, just for my own morbid curiosity. I nearly spat my drink out when I saw it. 30%. The movie is sitting at a 30% critic approval rating. Holy shit. What went wrong? I started reading these reviews to try and figure this out, and I noticed a trend. I saw that critics were upset that this was just an action movie, that it wasn't deep or it wasn't philosophical, that it was just a visceral style movie. And it was at that point I realized, okay, I get what's going on here. This makes perfect sense. I've seen this before with the previous two Superman movies, and why this shocked me and took me actually reading the reviews themselves to understand, I'm not quite sure. But I guess I was hoping it wasn't this, or I just didn't think that it would have this much an impact. The Superman Returns movie was generally well received by critics, generally disliked by the audience. The audience found it boring, for the same reasons that the critics liked it. The Man of Steel movie had the exact opposite effect. The audience generally loved it, whereas the critics generally were lukewarm at best, because it was more of an action movie, which is what the audience wanted and the critics didn't like. So when reading these reviews, it made perfect sense. For whatever reason, this trend continued. Critics did not like that it was an action movie, and the audience wanted that. I don't quite understand why they had the people reviewing it that didn't want it to be an action movie when it never indicated that it was anything but an action movie. What amazed me, though, is just how huge a gap this was. It's sitting at 30% for the critics, 75% for the audience. And this isn't just a small fan base or just a handful of reviews that can heavily influence a score like you'd often see on Metacritic. No, no, no. 150,000 user reviews are on this. I don't care how rabid a fan base you are, there is no way in hell that rabid fan base is that populous while also not being lazy. I know people, laziness often outweighs the fanaticism of fanboyism. And this makes perfect sense. This is what people wanted. They wanted an action movie. They wanted big fight scenes. I'm going to use a very old and true comparison here. If you want to know what it's like to be a god, you read DC Comics. If you want to know what it's like to be human, you read Marvel Comics. That is not a hit against either one. That is not an endorsement of either one. They are two completely different entities doing two completely different things that each have their own merits and place. That's how they've survived for so long while still both being comics, because they have taken this from two completely different sides. DC has some of the best fights of comics, just hands down. Marvel has some of the best stories, because they take it from a more human approach and make it a bit more relatable in that way. And going into this, I expected fights and big action scenes. And from everything I've heard about it so far, that's what people got. And that's what people wanted. So it was generally approved by the audience. The critics, however, didn't like that. I've never seen this big a swing from a big budget production. I've seen 20 points here and there. I will once again reference the uh, Superman Returns and the Man of Steel movie. Uh, they were at about a 15 to 20 point difference each. I've seen other big productions have about 20 point differences each as well. I've never seen this big a difference before. And I'm starting to see a lot more of these differences popping up. I used to see it was relatively close all the time. You'd have a movie here or there that the critics just didn't like, where the audience did, or vice versa. This seems to be common these days, to the point where if the audience and critics match up, that's more the rarity than the norm. But then this has been the case for gaming for a long time, but the reviews system is much worse and much more disorganized in gaming than it is in movies, which is a bit astounding at this point, to be honest. But I digress. The part that amuses me the most about this, though, is that if you actually Google Rotten Tomatoes Batman vs. Superman, you will see pages and pages and pages of articles talking about how bad the score is on Rotten Tomatoes for Batman vs. Superman by the same sites that have reviews on there. It's a bit amusing to me that in some ways they created their own news. I am not saying anything. I have no evidence or no indication that could even point me towards any kind of uh, article baiting through collusion like that. I just find it really amusing and not surprising at all that the same sites that have given bad reviews to this movie have now, in a sense, double dipped and written articles about, oh, this movie is doomed because it has a bad score on Rotten Tomatoes. They're reporting on the news they've created themselves. What a time to be alive. This, if nothing else, furthers my belief that the idea of these big review uh, just pooling sites have been outdated, because the opinions of critics and the opinions of audiences seem to be at complete opposite ends. The critics want something, the audiences want something else, and there is unfortunately rarely a matching anymore. This is why I like that in the last couple of years there have been a great rise of just personalities that you relate to, or that you know their tastes, you know what they like, and you can get honest opinions from them. It would be like me. I openly say all the time, I do not like shooting games. I'm not good with them. I hate the way they control. I don't like the twitch mechanics of FPSs, third-person shooters, what have you. They just aren't my thing. So having me review one would be incredibly bad to begin with, but you would realize, oh, this guy doesn't like shooters. I shouldn't listen to him. I should listen to someone else. And that's good. Having just more human level of relatability to a critical opinion will really help in that regard, and I hope that this starts to lead toward an end for sites like Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic, because they're still heavily used everywhere as reference points. And at this point, that does not serve a purpose anymore. Maybe I'm just thinking too far ahead. Maybe I'm just laughing at how ridiculous this one was, and this isn't the norm, but I'm seeing this happen a lot more, and especially with games. Oh my god, Metacritic is the bane of gaming everywhere. So maybe we'll see some good in the future, or maybe I'm just talking into the void. Either way, I'm going to go see Batman vs. Superman because from everything that I've heard, it is what I was wanting, just a big action movie. So here is my response to those critics who were wanting something deep and philosophical, something more tangential than just a visceral display of carnage and brutality. You do not get to decide what your audience is wanting, especially if that is not what was advertised. The Math Machine just rambling about how ridiculous critics have gotten and how they just can't relate to their audiences anymore, it seems. Peace out.